evening, everyone, and welcome to the May installment of the Phi Alpha Delta Speaker Series. As we allow everyone to finish joining our session this evening, I would like to say welcome. We are very pleased to have with us this evening Judge the Honorable John Broderick, who we will be sharing his presentation this evening on mental health as a way of acknowledging May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we are very grateful to Judge Broderick for being here this evening. Tonight, we will be playing the pre-recorded presentation of Judge Broderick's remarks. He will be here with us to answer a live Q&A. And then we are very excited to have with us Melissa Dewey, the Justice of the New Hampshire Statewide Alumni Chapter, who is going to be assisting us by honorarily initiating Judge Broderick into the New Hampshire Statewide Alumni Chapter. So Judge Broderick, by the end of the evening, you will officially be part of Phi Alpha Delta. So that is very, very exciting. Okay. I want to give a quick shout out to the Phi Alpha Delta Health Initiative. They are hosting a happy hour this upcoming Friday, the 20th, also in conjunction with Mental Health Awareness Month. The details for that event are all on P.A.D.org's event calendar. We are now going to go ahead and get started. So I am pleased to welcome Judge John Broderick to Phi Alpha Delta Speaker Series. Judge Broderick is the Senior Director of External Affairs at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and formerly served as the Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court. For the past 6 years, he has traveled throughout northern New England on a mission to change the culture and conversation around mental illness in an effort to destigmatize it. He says it is the most important work he has done in his entire professional life. And now it is my honor to introduce Judge Broderick. Please give us a moment so that our presentation can begin. All right. Hi, everyone. I do apologize. We seem to be having some technical difficulties with our presentation tonight. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing the full link in the video. However, Judge Broderick has said that he is willing to give some of his presentation to us live so that we can then move into the question and answer portion after that. So for all of those who would like to, please, as Judge Broderick is speaking, please utilize the question and answer function within the webinar to ask questions, which I will then pass to Judge Broderick. But Judge Broderick, would you like to start by maybe explaining a little bit about your work? I apologize that your video doesn't seem to want to participate with us this evening.
That's okay. That's how real life is, you know?
Yeah.
First of all, Emily, I'm very happy to be here tonight. In many ways, I'm the last guy on earth to be doing what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And it has become the most important work in my entire life. And I don't say that lightly. I've had some amazing professional opportunities in my lifetime, not the least of which has been Chief Justice of our Supreme Court in New Hampshire and Dean of the Law School at the University of New Hampshire. And I value those opportunities, but what I've been doing for the last 6 years means more to me because it affects more people than that. I'm a middle-class kid. I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm sorry about that if you don't like Massachusetts, but that's where I grew up. And my dad was a high school teacher. My mother wanted to be a nurse, but her family couldn't have afforded that. My mom worked in an office in the neighboring town. And my best friend, when I was 10 years old, lived right across the street from my home. And his father was a graduate of MIT. In my childhood, in my neighborhood, MIT was rock star status. My friend's uncle, his father's brother, never finished high school. He was an inpatient at the Danvers Mental Hospital in Danvers, Massachusetts. And every adult I ever knew who spoke of that place, and every kid, including me, by the way, used to refer to it as the nut house. We must have thought that was funny. Nobody was ashamed to say that. Nobody was embarrassed. looking back all these years later, we all should have been embarrassed. We all should have been ashamed, but we weren't. And often on Sundays in the summer, my friend's dad would pick his brother up from that house and bring him to their house across the street. And I can still remember him. I was 10 years old. And I can see him standing by the side of the garage, looking at the flowers, sometimes walking around the yard. He never looked at me, never spoke to me, never gestured to me, but I thought he was pretty scary. Because in the baby boomer world I grew up in, no one ever talked about mental health problems. No one. This wasn't a conversation people felt comfortable having. And I was frightened by the notion based on my friend's uncle. And when he was visiting on those days, I never had the courage to cross that road to play with my friend. I just didn't. And I was always happy when he left to go back to the nut house on those warm summer nights because I felt safe again. And because nobody talks about mental health in my neighborhood or in my town, I assumed as a kid that everyone had perfect mental health. And that guy was somehow one off and never know anyone or see anyone the rest of my life who had a mental health problem. And I was wrong about that. Some decades after that childhood that I described in a different state, namely New Hampshire, a mental illness crossed that road from my childhood and took up residence in my own house. My wife and I are both baby boomers. I had two sons, 11 and 13. And mental illness took up residence in my 13-year-old son. He didn't know he had a mental health problem. It makes sense when you think about it. How would you know that? It's just how you feel, how you react to other people and circumstances. But he was suffering. He just thought it was him. And we didn't see it. And over the years that followed, in subtle ways, and looking back, maybe not so subtle, but not identified, he started to exhibit more signs that we always had common sense explanations for. He started smoking in high school. He spent a lot of time alone in our house at his desk with the door closed drawing. He was a very talented artist. I would describe that now as withdrawing. But I didn't know much about mental illness back then. I know more now. And he had done well in high school, but not as well as he could have. But he always tested well. He was really smart. But he was working on 3 cylinders. But he got into a pretty good school, a pretty good college in New York, and then off he went. And we did weekend phone calls, and in some of those calls, I could hear alcohol in his voice and slurring his speech. It was pretty alarming. I didn't know he drank. I talked to him about it. He didn't want to talk about it. Dad, I don't have a drinking problem. Over time, I've been in campus, his friends would seek us out. They were worried about his drinking. He would say, Dad, I don't drink more than anybody else. I don't know why they're telling me that. And I knew he must have, but I couldn't prove it or disprove it. My son graduated from college, which, knowing what I now know, I'm just in awe of him and how he did that. And he'd done okay, not as well as he could have, but he tested well. He got into a pretty good graduate school in Boston, and then he came home, was living with us. We were living in Manchester, New Hampshire. He was commuting to class 3 days a week. And once he was home with us, it was pretty clear he was drinking pretty much every day, trying to hide it, trying to disguise it. But he really couldn't. Didn't want to talk about it. He moved north to Boston for the last 6 months of school, and he got a master's degree. He must have willed himself to that degree, knowing what I now know. And he got a job pretty quickly when he got out of graduate school, which wasn't surprising. He is, as I said, very smart. He's the best read person I've ever met. He's a talented artist. He's a self-taught musician. He writes music. He plays music. He's funny. He's handsome. He has everything going for him. So it wasn't surprising he got a job quickly, but it was surprising It only lasted 6 months. The next job took longer to get, and the last took for less time. It wasn't his fault, he said. He lost those jobs. And then he was home living with us and drinking, trying to hide it, trying to disguise it. He'd get part-time jobs, hourly rate jobs, but they weren't appropriate for someone of his skill and with his degrees. And finally, we reached out to the alcohol people, told them what I told all of you, and they said, your son's an alcoholic. That's what's happening here. And you and your wife better deal with that. We started to go to Al-Anon classes for family members of alcoholics. And my son thought that was ridiculous. Dad, I'm not an alcoholic. He'd say, if I didn't have these feelings, Dad, I wouldn't be drinking. We tell that to the alcohol people, that didn't change their mind. Judge, every alcoholic has a reason to drink, and your son's an alcoholic. And he said to us that day, you and your wife are going to have a choice to make, and here it is. You can decide to put your son out, literally out of your house. Hope he hits bottom and turns his life around. Or you can let him stay in your house, and he's going to die drinking there. Not tomorrow or next year. If you drink like he's drinking, you have a long life. And we didn't like those choices. And so we persuaded my son, who didn't have a drinking problem, to go to alcohol rehab and like the world tour of alcohol rehab. Finally, he went to Florida. I picked him up at Logan Airport in Boston after he flew home. And we were praying that he would have some insight about his drinking. And as I was driving walking to the baggage claim with him, he said, Dad, I had a drink on the plane on the way home, but I don't have a drinking problem. So nothing had taken. And up to this point, by the way, no neighbor, no family member, no friend, no colleague, and sadly not my wife and I, ever said, I wonder if you could have a mental health problem. And so finally, my wife and I, feeling we had no choice, we anguished, we loved our son. And we finally decided to put him out. It seemed like that was the only choice we had. And it was the hardest decision we ever made. It was the worst decision we ever could have made. It was like gasoline on fire. And after 3 weeks of that agony and not wanting that phone call that no parent wants to receive, we brought him home. And once he got home, he was drinking just as much. Trying to hide it, obviously, but he couldn't really hide it. And then one night, I think he was probably scared to death that we would put him out again, and he knew he couldn't go out again. And so one night he'd been drinking, and he assaulted me. I went to the intensive care unit of a Manchester hospital. My funny, talented, decent, master's educated son was arraigned in a public courtroom before a lot of cameras and news people. I was on the Supreme Court at the time, so it was a story. It was issued in our jumpsuit and went to the local jail. I didn't know any of that at the time. My wife did, obviously. And it was all over the news in New Hampshire and Boston. I wrote about it in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times. When I was in the ICU, my doctors went on the Today Show to talk about how I was doing. The Attorney General of our state had a lot of press conference. I didn't know any of that. I don't know how my wife was able to deal with that or my son. She visited my son when I was in the hospital in the ICU. He was at the Ballistic Jail. And she later told me in their first visit they talked on the phone with plexiglass between them. He had his orange jumpsuit on, his ankles were sharp, and he was very upset. Mom, I can't believe I did that to Dad. Just tell me Dad's going to be okay. I can never forgive myself. She didn't know. Not in the early days. About 6 or 8 days after I was in the hospital, I remember being wheeled down a corridor. That was the first time I knew I was in a hospital. I had no idea why I was there. I said to the fellow, what am I doing here? He said, I think you fell, Judge. I had no memory of that, but I had no memory of anything else either. So I accepted that. After about a day and a half in the hospital room, my wife and I were finally alone with no doctors or nurses or visitors of any kind. And she told me as best she knew what had happened, and I hadn't fallen. And she told me where my son was. And we just cried. I'd been a judge and lawyer my entire professional life at that point. I knew what it meant for him, for us, even for his brother. His younger brother was married, had gotten a master's degree, his life was moving ahead as you would hope. The oldest son, with all of his gifts, ended up in the county jail. I don't know the technical definition of hopelessness, but I know what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't go home with my wife. I couldn't talk to my son. I wasn't even thinking maybe this is going to the newspaper. So I still couldn't have been totally with the program. If I had any understanding at all, it would have been alcohol, when it's abused, can take people to strange places. I was wrong about that in my son's case, but that's what I thought. I wasn't allowed to visit him when he was in the Ballistic Jail. The court wouldn't allow, so my wife would go 2 days a week by herself. I don't know how she survived that. I didn't see him for 6 months. And I saw him that morning in a windowless basement courtroom in Manchester, New Hampshire. There was still press covering him. He was going to be sentenced that day on a guilty plea to the state prison. I hope you don't have that day in your life. I would bet you anything I ever did or owned, might ever do, that couldn't have been my family. It was on that morning. My son came in that morning, he looked great, walked over to us, and I stood up in the public section in the front row. And he gave me a big hug. Said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that to you. Just tell me you're going to be okay." I said, "They tell me I'm going to be fine." I said to him that morning, "If you don't quit, your mother and I will quit." I wasn't sure I believed that myself, but that's what I said. And then he was sentenced to 7.5 to 15 years in the state prison. It's hard to even imagine that now, but I don't know how we all didn't pass out, to be honest. It seems so hopeless. The court suspended 4 of the 7. We had served 6 months already, but he was trying to wait for at least 3 years. Maybe get parole, but no guarantee. And after about 40 days, we were allowed to go and visit. We met with the head psychiatrist and 2 social workers, my son, who had to allow it, obviously, my wife and I. And the psychiatrist started the meeting off by saying, "I've come to know your son the last 40 days. I really like him. He's really decent and smart and funny. He's got every life skill you need, Judge, to be successful." I said, "I know that. We love our son, but we're in the prison here, Doctor." He said, "No, I know that. Let me tell you what's going on with your son. Your son has really serious depression. He has anxiety and panic attacks, the feeling you're about to die, which the psychiatrist described as virtually off the charts." He said, "That's why he was drinking, Judge. That was the only relief he could get. He was self-medicating his mental illness." He said, "It wasn't a good decision, don't get me wrong, but it made sense. To him, it was the only relief he could find. The problem is you end up drinking more, you get more depressed, you end up drinking more. It's a black hole." He said, "We're going to try to work with him here and see if we can turn his life around." And I thought all mental health problems, by the way, were hopeless. I don't feel that way now. I know that's not true now. But that's what I thought of that morning. And so we visited twice a week for the next 3 years. About 20% of my day job was hearing appeals from the very people my son was not living with 24/7. You might imagine I wasn't really popular at the prison. He was pretty brave about it. I admired that. Anyway, after 4 months, he came out one night at one of our visits and gave us a big hug, as he always did. He said, "Dad, I feel so different. I said, what do you mean different? He said, Dad, I'm sleeping through the night. I haven't done that since I was little. My mind isn't racing all day, Dad. I'm focused now. I can focus. I'm teaching at the prison. I said, what are they doing for you? He said, oh, I see a counselor here, Dad. She's really good. And I take medication now at night and in the morning. I didn't know you could feel like this. And when he said that to us in that place, I knew we had failed him. My wife's, after all, a parent. I should have done something about mental illness. I didn't. He was paroled after 3 years. I said to him, they may not do that. I was Chief Justice, and it looked like they're favoring the judge's son. But they paroled him. He was so good on parole. After a year, the parole officer said, I'm going to try to eliminate your parole. I actually enjoy visiting you once a month. Something wrong with that picture. And they eliminated his parole. My son, who was drinking every day for many years, has not had a drop of alcohol in 15 years. He said, Dad, I'm not taking high anymore. I don't get tired anymore, Dad. You can leave me in a liquor store. I wouldn't drink. And he's talking a lot about mental illness and the mistakes, obviously, that I made, that we all made. And we love our son. But I'm a baby boomer, so I don't really want to talk about it. I'm the last guy to be here tonight. But I think it's really important now. I didn't do anything for almost a decade. I got involved in a campaign. It's a genius of a psychologist in Maryland. Her name is Barbara Van Dalen. She wanted to make the 5 most common signs of mental illness as well known and widely known as the signs of a heart attack or stroke. I thought that was genius. I still do. Many of you know the signs of a heart attack or stroke, or some of them. That wasn't always true, by the way. Now we call 911 and thousands of lives are saved every year. So I got involved in this campaign. We launched it. It's non-partisan, non-political. We launched it on a Monday morning, May 23rd, 2016, in an empty state house in our health chamber. New Hampshire has 400 state reps. So we're a small state, but we have a lot of state reps. They weren't in session, so all those theater-style seats were empty. And I thought, what are we doing? No one's going to come to this on a work day. Are you kidding me? On mental health awareness? When I got there that morning with my wife, there were 425 people in that chamber. It was the single most impressive room ever assembled in my 4 decades. 3 members of our Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, our Attorney General, every member of our congressional delegation, our governor, the Catholic bishop, the Episcopal Church, the Jewish community, hospital CEOs, business CEOs, educators, law enforcement, state police, the mental health community, and families. It was stunning. I knew that a lot of families were dealing with mental health, and my family had not been nearly as alone as we felt. And the woman behind this campaign, Barbara Van Dalen, shared these statistics that morning. 1 in 5 adolescents, 1 in 5 adults have a mental health problem. That year, over 48,000 people died by suicide in America. More than died in every traffic accident in the country. Every 90 minutes, then and now, every single day, some brave American veteran, he or she, takes their own life. We lose 20 veterans a day in suicide. Last year, and for many years before last year, more police officers and first responders died by suicide than every other cause in the line of duty combined. It was eye-opening. The last 6 years of my life, with the help of Dartmouth-Hitchcock, which was a huge hospital and medical school associated with Dartmouth College, I have been traveling all over New England. I've spoken now almost 700 times in 5 states, sometimes beyond. I share my family story, and as time has gone on, I've shared what I've learned from young people. I've spoken to almost 100,000 young people, grades 6 through 12. And I've hugged maybe 4,000 of those kids who come up and share with me at the end of my talk. I've hugged police officers, I've hugged teachers. Doesn't matter. It's an everywhere, everyday problem. And I continue to do that work, and I'll do it as long as invitations arrive. I don't charge for my talk. I work for Dartmouth-Hitchcock, so they've made it possible. But for 22 years, I was a trial lawyer. I love that. I love being a trial lawyer. And then I had an opportunity to go on the Supreme Court. I never aspired to be a judge, but it seemed an unusual opportunity that wouldn't happen twice. So I took it, and I'm grateful I did. And I was on the Supreme Court for 15 years. I was Chief Justice there my last 7. I could have stayed on as Chief Justice for another 7, but I wanted to do something else. And I became the Dean of the Law School at UNH. I was there 5 years. And then I went to work for Dartmouth-Hitchcock, not knowing that I'd be focused on this. That's what I've been doing. And I know this program is about mental health and the legal profession. Lawyers are not unique. It affects everyone, everywhere, every day. But in the legal profession, having been an active trial lawyer for 22 years, I know the breed. I love lawyers, don't get me wrong. I think they're fabulous people, interesting to be around. I'm particularly fond of trial lawyers. But I also know a lot of type A personalities in the legal profession. I've never been one myself, but to my knowledge, I didn't have any mental health issues. Well, I suppose I could have. And when I was practicing law, I didn't know anybody who had a mental health problem. It was like my childhood all over again. Everyone was fine, everyone was tough, everyone was resilient. I know that wasn't true now, but you wouldn't have known it then. So there were truly a lot of people who were hiding, who were ashamed or afraid about their job or their career. It used to be that way for police, but they're changing now. They are changing. The state police in my state has an office of wellness and resiliency. Commissioner of Safety talks about mental health frequently. They have embedded social workers in some of the state police barracks. It's a different time, and it's changing. The legal profession needs to understand the realities on the ground. And the ABA study from 2016 demonstrated that lawyers, not surprisingly, have a higher incidence of mental health problems, usually anxiety and depression, than the average population. But even in the average population, it's 1 in 5. Law students from some of the studies I've read and seen have a very high incidence of mental health problems. Binge drinking is a huge issue in law school, and law students are under a lot of stress. When I went to law school, I went to the University of Virginia as an out-of-state student at the law school. I'm going to show my age. I paid $3,500 a year, room, board, and tuition. Today, if I went to Virginia, it's probably $75,000. And so when I sat for the bar in my state, I had no debt. Not because we were a wealthy family, we weren't, but between summer jobs and my parents' assistance, I didn't have any law school or college debt. So when I sat for the bar, I didn't have that stress. When I went to law school, I wasn't incurring huge debt. And also the profession I entered back then was competitive, but not like it is now. Advertising was almost non-existent. Suits against lawyers were highly unusual. It's a very different environment, I understand that. But in that sense, the need to start talking about it, normalizing it, demythologizing it, is very real. And I just have two brief suggestions. One is the American Bar Association, after the 2016 survey, which I recommend you if you haven't read it, it's online. They asked law firms, especially, to take the ABA pledge, which you can read about. And some of the largest law firms in the country have done that. It's all about mental health and substance and trying to change the culture inside firms, supporting those people who may be struggling, getting to them and supporting them before bad things happen. Some of the brand name law firms in the country have done that, but not nearly enough law firms have done it. It's got a 7-point program, some that involves bringing in speakers. I commend it to you. I'd like you to look at it and see if it fits. The other thing I want to suggest, in every state in the country, there's the equivalent of a character and fitness questionnaire. They have one in my state, they have one in most states. So before you're admitted to the bar, you have to answer a number of questions. And one of the questions on the character and fitness questionnaire asks law students at their third year, having passed the bar, whether they've ever sought mental health treatment, whether they've ever had a mental health problem that could interfere with their ability to practice law. And most law students are not clinicians, so they don't know whether it could interfere. So most law students have heard on the side of disclosing, let someone else figure that out. But once you give that information, the next question says, please sign this release. So the court can gather, or the character and fitness committee can gather your mental health records. Pretty sweeping. And I was Chief Justice when that existed. It existed before me. It existed after me. So I don't want to seem too righteous about it. I never focused on it. I'm a baby boomer, so I probably looked back to that question made sense. It makes no sense. And it's probably a violation of the ADA to ask that way. It's not behavior, it's not wrongful conduct. It's like saying, have you ever had diabetes? Have you ever had a heart attack? They don't ask those questions. So 2 law students at our law school at UNH filed a petition with our Supreme Court Character and Fitness Committee saying you should eliminate those questions. The Conference of Chief Justices of the United States, I was privileged to be in that conference for 7 years, they passed a resolution which should be online a couple of years ago recommending that all states eliminate those questions. About 12 or 14 states have done that last count. My state, I'm proud to say, has eliminated those 2 questions. And that's only right. We don't ask lawyers, by the way, who are admitted to practice every year, do you have a mental health problem? And we shouldn't. So if we're trying to normalize it and demythologize it and destigmatize it, it seems to be in everyone's interest to have law students and lawyers be willing to talk about it with their colleagues. In my state, when I was Chief Justice, we professionalized the Lawyers Assistance Committee. We had volunteers who were doing that work, and they were remarkable. But I wanted to have somebody full-time in the wheelhouse, and so we assessed a $3 or $4 fee on all lawyers in the state. You have to be a dues-paying member of our bar to practice. It's a unified bar. And the $3 or $4 didn't get huge pushback, but it got some. But at that point, it just made sense to me. And so we did that. And now we have someone full-time. It's a much more helpful organization, not punitive. And it's making progress. But I encourage lawyers on this call or in your law firms or in your day-to-day life, if you know someone, maybe you, that you think has a mental health issue or a substance problem, my plea to you is don't be so tough on yourself. Talk to someone. You're obviously bright. You wouldn't be a member of the bar if you weren't bright and talented. Not a statement about who you are. It's just a statement about what's bothering who you are. And that's what you need to address. And so I encourage the legal profession to start normalizing. And you should, because I've interviewed a lot of the future lawyers in America in middle schools and high schools, and I had a lot of anxiety and depression. It doesn't go away in the passage of time. It needs to be treated like any health issue. But the good news is treatment works. And it's smart to do because if you let it go, it will eventually show itself in a malpractice case or an ethical violation or both. And again, it's not because you have a black swan, you tried to do something that wasn't appropriate, but you weren't well. So my plea to all of you is normalize it. Help colleagues who are suffering. And if you're suffering, reach out to someone and try to change your culture in your own shop, your own firm, or wherever you might be practicing the law. But if you have any questions or comments, obviously be happy to take them.
Thank you, Judge. Please, everyone, if you do have questions for Judge Broderick, please go ahead and use our question and answer feature so that I can pass them on to the judge. I did want to start with one question, something that I noticed while you were talking about your own experience in law school. The idea that you were lucky enough to graduate without debt. These days, I believe the last statistic is that I think 95% of graduating law students do have to take out loans, or they have loans when they graduate. And the average amount of debt is $165,000. Do you feel like that the way that has changed in the legal industry does have some bearing on mental health? Obviously, money is such a stress to all of us. Have you seen that in your time, that you think that maybe that's part of one of the reasons that lawyers in particular face these kind of issues?
I think it does, actually. If I owed $165,000, I would have had trouble holding a number 2 pencil, taking inflation. And then talking about stress, that would get my attention. And I think it's real. And the other thing that's done, by the way, when I graduated from law school in 1865, 1866, you could do whatever you wanted to do. I wanted to work in the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts. The gap in pay was not as great then between the state and the private firms, but it was a cut. But I didn't have a lot of debt, obviously, so I could afford to do it. A lot of people graduating today don't have the same freedom. The other thing that didn't exist when I graduated, technology was really non-existent. If you had a phone and a dictaphone, you were ready for prime time. Today, you're probably not going to stay in practice for very long. So it's more expensive to get into practice. The consuming public is less accepting in a way than maybe when I started. And because of the internet, and because everyone thinks they can do it themselves, usually when people came to see me, I was the keeper of the keys. I knew the law, I could find it. They didn't. Now people come to lawyers, they know exactly what they think the law is. It's usually wrong, right? They think they know. And then they're trying to find a lawyer who's going to be tough and mean. And, it's a very different universe. So I don't know what the answer is on law school debt, other than I think it is impacting the mental health of young people. I think it's affecting career choice and job satisfaction. I think we are living in a billable hour world in a way that was never quite true when I was younger. I always worked hard, but I always left the phone. I could go home. I don't think today's professional could do that in the same way. All kinds of stressors. And, in an ideal world, law schools would have ready referral for law students to community mental health centers or private practitioners that would be picked up either by their insurance or through the school. Law firms would have access to counseling services, not in a shameful sense. I do think, I've used this example before, I think it's true. Because I hug all these kids in high schools and middle schools. And a lot of those kids tell me they're ashamed of their mental health. And a boy the other day came up to me after I spoke, and he was hobbling on crutches. And I said, what happened? He said, I sprained my ankle pretty bad. And kids were there, they wanted to carry his books. And I thought, what if it was really a bad thing to have a sprained ankle? And it would be a sign of weakness or failure. So you had to say to that boy, put the crutches down, walk like it doesn't hurt, and take gym class, and don't complain. How would that be? We do that to people with mental illness all the time.
We do.
And that's what we have to change. And I so admire lawyers. I mean, I really enjoy lawyers. This is an area where we have not done all we should be doing. We need to speak up. And law firms do too.
Yeah. And so on that note, you think, I think I know your answer to this, but the role of individuals obviously is very critical as they, I think everyone should be talking about it in their place of employment if they feel comfortable, if they are able to, because that on an individual level. But we are an organization too. So what can organizations do besides putting on programs such as this to help spread awareness, to kind of provide resources for our fellow lawyers? Do you think that should be like an integral part of our programming, in perpetuity?
I do. I do. It's a huge area of American life now. From 2007 to 2017, during that 10-year period, the rate of suicide for people ages 10 to 24, that pulls in R.E.A.C.T, increased by 56%.
Wow.
Not just happening. You now see mental health stories on the front page of the New York Times. You see it above the fold more and more. And it's not going away. And so I think legal organizations should stop hiding those topics, should have programs dealing with it, should have people dealing with legal ethics, talking about how do you handle it, what do you do, and with substance problems. We're all waiting for the disaster, and some of the saddest days I spent on the Supreme Court of my state were days when somebody was before you for taking money out of a trust account, which usually meant that you were never going to have a license to practice law again. And there were always mitigating circumstances, none of them sufficient. But I often wondered whether some of these folks had substance issues, mental health issues. They didn't take the money with a black heart. Most lawyers didn't. They were going to put it back. But they just ran into problems, and some of them might have been mental health problems. And so I wonder if we were all open about it and supportive about it. Someone said to me recently, we don't really know what the face of mental health looks like. And I said, well, I do. It looks like Michael Phelps, Prince Harry, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, Kevin Love, on and on and on. I mean, it's all around us. And sometimes just having someone say, I hear you, I'm here, I got your back, let's deal with it. That's so refreshing. It's like the kid with a broken ankle not being able to tell you. If I say, I can't take you, my ankle's sprained, he'd feel better just not hiding it. And lawyers are too bright and too talented to buy into this charade any longer. And so I hope the organizations of lawyers will lead the crusade. We don't have a mental health system, by the way, in this country, and we never will until people speak up.
Yeah. We received one question through the Q&A and another through the chat. So we'll start with the Q&A one. One individual sharing that they're not a traditional student. They're currently in their 40s, but they do still want to attend law school. But they're discouraged about the idea of getting into debt and all of those things. Their specific question was, do you see middle-aged individuals that complete law school and are still able to be successful? I would answer that on a personal level. For those who I've met through Phi Alpha Delta, yes, absolutely. We have tons of non-traditional students who have a great amount of success. But I mean, Judge Broderick, first of all, in your professional experience as a trial lawyer and then a judge, what's your perspective on that? And also, what are then the other mental health considerations to be taking into account when we've already gone through with the fact that the law system, it's so difficult as it is. How do you do it when you're in a non-traditional element?
I think, if you're going to go to law school in your 40s, and I don't discourage that, my suggestion would be you have a very specific reason for it. Why are you doing it? Just have a law degree is nice, and it probably has some benefit to you in the world of business. So it's not like it's not of any value, but given what people are paying for law school, I mean, when I went to law school, that was the 5th year of college for a lot of people. I had no idea what they were going to do. And it's not, I got to put your law school, why don't I do that for 3 years, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do. But back then, a school like Virginia, you could go there for 3 years for $10,000. So you could afford to do that. Today, you might be spending $150,000 and graduating with debt, saying, what am I doing with this? So I think I wouldn't discourage it. And there are non-traditional law students, some of them are physicians, right? When I was at law school, dean of the law school at UNH, we had a former college president going to law school. She was amazing. That was a great school. And I never said to her, what are you doing here? But I thought, you're the president of a great college. But she was intrigued by the law as a discipline. She never practiced. But if you're going to law school in your 40s, if you have an MBA and you're in the world of business and you're on the rise, maybe a good investment. If you are just deciding you're going to change careers and become a lawyer in your 40s, unless the family owns the firm, that can be hard. There's a lot of people, I'm not saying it's fair, but they'll say, well, why do you want to go to law school? You're 44 years old. I mean, everyone interviewing here is 26. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it takes a special person to do it. So I don't want to say don't do it, but I would say, given the cost, have a very specific reason that's realistic as to how to advance your life.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. Someone else asked specifically how they, from the outside perspective, can support law students. They shared that while their oldest godchild was in law school, one of his classmates took his own life, unfortunately. So how can we be supporting law students? Are there any specific strategies that we can be keeping in mind as we interact with them?
What I would like to see happen, and law schools are accredited, and the American Bar Association has a lot of influence on law schools, and they could say, we really want to see what you're doing on mental health. What mental health services do you offer? What mental health referrals do you offer? I also think, by the way, I don't know if anyone on this call ever saw the paper chase that's by Harvard Law School, curmudgeonly professor humiliating people in class. I had that experience when I was in law school. I often thought, why are you doing that to us? It's almost bullying. Us. You're smarter than we are. We acknowledge that. We're freshmen here. We don't know the law. And you've been teaching for 30 years. So if you want to make me look uninformed and foolish, you can, but I don't think it helps my stress level. Some of the professors never did that. They were terrific. But I do think there's an artificial level of stress in law school instruction that is not essential to good lawyering. And I think it really freaks out a lot of law students, and they feel inadequate. So I think law school should take a look at what they're doing and how they're teaching it. Right now in the world of residencies in hospitals, these medical students, the old model was they work 20 hours a day, they don't sleep, they don't eat it. And is that a good idea? I don't think so. And I think they're starting to wake up to that. And while it was never that hard in law school, there were a lot of things that you had to jump through. I wasn't sure it mattered much, other than it made your life unpleasant. So I think the ABA should be pressing. I think the law school deans in this country, I was one for a while. This was not on my radar. If I were a dean now, I'd be bringing this up at the dean's meetings. Like, what are we doing for law students? And acknowledging the mental health situation among law students. I mean, it's a real issue.
Yeah, and really, really work to destigmatize it, because that will address so many of the root causes.
Well, and one of the ways to prove that is to take away those questions on the character and fitness.
Yeah, exactly, like you talked about.
So right now, it's a shameful admission. I mean, that's why it's on there. Like, you may not be qualified to be a lawyer. I mean, you could have 2 heart attacks. I wouldn't disqualify you. So if you're not a good lawyer, the clients will figure that out and won't be very successful. But not because you're a psychiatrist or therapist. It's really insulting. And it's unnecessary. So if lawyers want to make a change, go there. Say to the Supreme Court. The Chief Justices want you to eliminate those questions. Why do we have them?
Yeah. Start there.
The law student will thank you for that.
Well, we are coming up at the top of our hour here, so I'll ask Melissa to hop back on and join us so that we can go ahead and conduct your virtual initiation before we end for the evening. So Melissa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Judge Broderick, for bringing us this wonderful presentation tonight. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I thank you. But now on to our honorary initiation. So by consent of the International Executive Board of our fraternity, it is now my pleasure to proceed to confer honorary membership in the New Hampshire statewide alumni chapter of Phi Alpha Delta upon the Honorable John T. Broderick, Jr. Phi Alpha Delta was founded in 1902 and exists today as a cohesive force uniting students and teachers of the law with members of the bench and bar in a professional association designed to advance the ideals of liberty and equal justice under the law, to stimulate excellence in scholarship, to foster integrity and professional competence, to inspire the attributes of compassion and courage among our members in applying the rule of law, to promote the professional development and advancement of our members so that each member may enjoy a lifetime of honorable professional service. The principles to which we are dedicated having been laid before you, I now ask whether you will subscribe with us to them and will regard yourself as a member with us in Phi Alpha Delta.
Yeah. Excuse me. I thought you were going to do some more reading. No, I'm obviously I will, and I'm very honored to be part of the organization.
Thank you. I will now administer the oath of membership to which every member of Phi Alpha Delta subscribes. And I'm going to take this slowly because it's long. I solemnly and sincerely promise and swear
I solemnly and sincerely promise and swear
that I will support
that I will support
the laws and legal precepts of my country
the law and legal precepts of our country
and of its legal entities,
and other legal entities,
that I will respect their courts
that I will respect their courts
and obey their legal mandates,
and obey their legal mandates,
that I will be just and honorable
that I will be just and honorable
in all my professional activities,
in all my professional activities,
and will be faithful to those whom I represent,
and will be faithful to those whom I represent,
and that I will support
and that I will support
the policies, rules, and precepts
the policy, rules, and precepts
of Phi Alpha Delta Law Fraternity International,
Phi Alpha Delta Law Fraternity International,
insofar as they do not conflict with my religious or civil duties.
insofar as they don't conflict with my religious, I didn't hear the rest of it,
Or civil duties.
civil duties.
Thank you. Thank you for joining with us. In recognition of your professional standing and devotion to the law, in token of your dedication to the principles of our fraternity, and in evidence of the high esteem in which our chapter and the fraternity hold you, you will be invested with the honorary key of Phi Alpha Delta. This key, along with your membership certificate and pin, will be mailed to you for you to display. To everyone on our call, I now take great pleasure in presenting to you the Honorable John T. Broderick as a member of our fraternity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, you did a wonderful job, and I'm honored to be part of it. I look forward to the day when the world isn't all virtual.
Mhm. We do too.
Yes, we do.
I think everyone at this point is kind of zoomed out, and it's a valuable tool, obviously, but it doesn't replace face-to-face in person. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. But you have a standing invitation to all of our upcoming in-person events anytime you would like. We are very happy to have you. And we thank you so much again for taking your time this evening to speak to us, to shine a light on such a critically important topic that I think we all learned something tonight. And hopefully we can take this back to our schools, our chapters, our firms, wherever we are, and really make the commitment to be sharing this alongside with you.
Well, thank you, Emily, and it's an honor to be among you. So I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Mental illness and the mental illness awareness has really become the most important thing I've done. I'm very genuine about that. But I'm so impatient for change. If we don't have a mental health system, we don't.
No.
And that's shameful too. So warriors are highly respected members of the community, and they have really respected voices. And I am pleading with them to use them, not just for their colleagues, but for a lot of people who are suffering.
An excellent word and plea to end on. So I will just wrap up and say thank you, all of you who joined us tonight for the May Speaker Series presentation. We will be taking a little bit of break from the speaker series for the summer, but we look forward to having everyone back right after convention as we pick up with the speaker series again. In the meantime, all of our other upcoming events and webinars can be found on the event calendar on P.A.D.org, and we hope to see you whether in person or virtually at many of them. So good night, everyone. Oh, really quick question. Where and when will this recording be available on demand? It will be processed over the next week or so, and it will be available on the Phi Alpha Delta YouTube channel, our webinar playlist. So we have a full speaker series playlist on the Phi Alpha Delta YouTube, which can be accessed from our homepage, www.pad.org. So that's where the recording will be. All attendees will be emailed when that is available. So we will make sure to get that to you as soon as we can. So thank you again, Judge Broderick. Thank you, Melissa. Have a great evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Melissa,
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.